Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you for joining. We on this Shahr Ramadan webinar. Inshallah, you're all well. We've got a special guest today, happily from the Muslim community. I'm always happy to see initiatives such as that of today, and we've had a lot of interest for this webinar for a while, in there being lack of resources, lack of support, lack of education on the topic of relationships and sex education, and especially in England, it being something which was introduced in 2018, and the concerns that a lot of Muslim parents had at that time and continue to have really with the material which is not only just in schools but in media and just living in the UK, and how parents can inshallah approach that. So we have that today. So as usual, I'd like to start as we normally do with reflecting from the Quran. Hopefully everyone can see that. Yeah. Okay. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's the month of Quran, so we thought we'd start with the Quran, and I'd like to give maybe a little bit more time to this, seeing as it is Shahr Ramadan, and have everyone is inshallah benefiting from this month when we are looking and doing tafakkur and tadabbur on the verses of Quran. And I've just picked out some verses which are meaningful, at least for me. So the first verses of Surah Al-Mu'minun, we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about people, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ. And it's really interesting that the word which, or the translation, is private, something which is private to you. And again in tarbiyah, it's important that children realize that some body parts are private, and and that's a really good way of starting, and how the Quran introduces the topic of sexual morality. And then obviously illa alal azwajihim. So there is an exception which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts on that. And again, understanding of marriage, understanding of rightful spouses, for example, and in differentiating that. If we see another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Ahzab is talking about both the believing men and the believing women, because I think sometimes there may be a gender stereotype sometimes when we talk about education, or we talk about hijab, or we talk about these things, but no, and as a man, I'd probably say men, it comes to the verse of the hijab comes to the men first, that we lower our gazes, for example. So think for both men and women. So for example, in this verse, in verse 35 of Surah Al-Ahzab, we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking again to وَالْحَافِظِينَ فُرُوجَهُمْ وَالْحَافِظَاتِ. So both men and women who are preserving their private parts. And again, that this is a topic which is relevant for both Muslim men and Muslim women. And the famous chapter Nur, Surah Nur, which we talked about in terms of the hijab just now. in this verse, what I thought was again interesting was the length of which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emphasizes in restraining the sight, but he says, except for these people. And in the concept of puberty, and especially puberty of children, we find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse says, O alal tifle allazina lam yuzharu alal awratil nisa. So tifle is child or children who are not yet aware, or they're not yet privy to the to women, awrat al-nisa, for the women. And again, we have this concept of puberty. So before puberty, there is not that need for the hijab, for example, when for younger children. And I think it's really important that we recognize puberty and what the rulings, the Islamic rulings, which come into effect after puberty and what doesn't come before puberty. And again, this is an example of that. Continuing in this verse, we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stipulates certain timings for us. And again, there's a lot of hikmah, a lot of wisdom behind this, that he is stipulating that because there is a gap in understanding, and in this verse, this gap is clearly shown, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beautifully puts how the children intermingle between us, you know, because obviously we for a healthy family, you will find a close relationship between the parents and the children. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts, again, the verse starts with Ya ayyuhal lazina amanu. So it is meant for the believers. It is meant for the Muslim believers who subscribe to the idea of modesty, chastity, and understanding what the puberty is. And again, the idea of seeking permission. And also in this verse is lam yablagu. So they have not reached balagha, they have not reached bulugh in terms of the puberty. Oh, you have attained faith. Let those whom rightfully possess, and those of you who have not yet reached puberty, seek your permission before entering on 3 occasions before the dawn prayer at noon, when you lay aside your clothes, and after the evening prayer, 3 occasions of privacy. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is stipulating that this is the time which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given for that. And obviously, from an adult perspective, how that is important, that we realize that that time is there. And at other times, neither you nor they commit sin by intermingling with each other. Now, this is so important, so that when this doesn't happen, this could have a very devastating impact on the children. And I know myself, I've heard of cases where that has happened and has had very difficult consequences for the children. So I think, inshallah, there's more we can, inshallah, discuss on this webinar. For those of you who may not know what strong support is, or what strong support is about, and they might be joining us today, we are a peer support organization which is there to primarily support Muslims who have conflicts with their sexuality or gender identity. We were started in October 2019 in response to the fact that there wasn't particularly a service or support organization which was helping Muslims with these issues. We have a free consultation service, which about 250 people across the world have accessed so far. We have weekly support circles, and actually one of them is the parent support circle as well. When we started, we didn't really have, to be honest, when I started this, I didn't really think that the parents would come into this picture at all, because at least for me in my journey, it was a lot more in, okay, I have this, what do I do with it? But as the issue and as the feedback of what we were doing became more clear, we realized there was a huge need of parents or even spouses who are going through this issue, and it's not something that the individual who is struggling with their sexuality or gender identity is having on its own. And yeah, so alhamdulillah, we have a parents circle which we've benefited immensely, and I've learned a lot myself. And I know some parents from that circle are joining us today for this. So salam and thank you for being with us. We also provide one-to-one coaching, and in terms of our way of educating the Ummah or providing resources is through these webinars. They're completely free, they're accessible. You can see them on our Facebook page. You might be joining us there, or you might be viewing them from our YouTube channel as well. So some of the work that we've been doing is, and actually I'm happy that Brother Yusuf is with us for this. So this is one of the things that, this is actually probably how I met Brother Yusuf. So for those of you who know me, I've been chanting a long time about this, or if you go through our webinars, about this concept of conversion therapy ban and what this actually means for us and what it means for our population. Now, I sent out the our guidance on what to respond to the consultation, and I was completely amazed that someone else in the Muslim community had actually written about this as well. And I was like, who is this person? I need to speak to them immediately, because I thought I'm a lone voice in this, wondering what's happening to the Ummah, what's happening to our state, where we've reached a place where having a certain type of view or providing a certain type of support for people who are going that direction is being criminalized. And alhamdulillah, we got to discuss, and Brother Yusuf is instrumental in the letter that we wrote to the government. He's the one who edited it, made it a lot more legible than probably the draft I initially made, and was able to get about 250 Muslim leaders to sign that. And we had a response as well, as you've seen, from the Minister of Equalities, Mike Freer. The latest on this, as everybody always asks us, where is it, is that we know that the government has the intention to carry on with the ban, but only for the lesbian, gay, and bisexual population, and they're leaving the transgender from this ban. Now, the issue that we still continue to have is that we don't know what this term means and how they legislate it. What does it actually mean? Does it mean conversion therapy where you're coercing someone, or does it mean if anybody is trying to explore what is available to them, or they're trying to move in a way which is God-centric, which is taqwa, and they're trying to be a good Muslim and they're trying to find help. And when the law comes in, the law is a sharp knife to an issue which probably could be resolved by professional regulation. So it's whether they need a legislation for this issue, especially when they realize that the whole field of counseling and psychotherapy is not under any form of legislation. So anybody can call themselves a counselor or psychotherapist. Yet for this specific, very specific issue, they are trying to legislate. So we are still following, as Brother Yusuf knows, we are still waiting for a response from the government if they give us some time and see. But what we see today is we have groups, for example, Christian Concern, which has started a legal challenge because, again, this is quite serious. It goes against, it can potentially, if the bill is worded wrongly, it could violate the European human rights, EC human rights, in particular Article 9, which talks about family, which talks about religion, freedom of religion and speech as well. So inshallah, we are following that. And with people like Brother Yusuf, we are going forward in this. So one of, as I said, we have support circles. We've had support circles now, which have been running for over 2 years. If you do find a support circle which isn't available, we have a form which you can fill in, and we can start a support circle in your area as well. We find a lot of people in developing countries, Muslim countries, who can't afford. We have a very heavily discounted rate of £10 per month, which is literally, you know, like we've just said that. So it's sustainable. Now, some people can't afford that because obviously £10 in, you know, Africa or places, developing Muslim countries, could be quite a lot. So if you're watching this and you want, in Shahr Ramadan, you want to donate, even just £10 can be the difference of someone having a month of support in the support circle. So please do donate if that is possible. So finally, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for this month. Brother Yusuf is the founder of Parental Guidance and SREIslamic. SREIslamic, as we talked about at the start, was set up, I think, long before this RSHE, and, you know, when it becomes a bit popular, I would say. And Brother Yusuf has been doing this work, mashallah, since 2008, probably maybe even before that, where SREIslamic provides advice, support, and training on this issue of sex and relationships education. The aim as well of Parental Guidance is to create a movement where Muslim parents feel confident in discussing these issues with their children. Brother Yusuf himself works for a mental health charity. You can find these resources. So if you go to sreislamic.org, you can find that, inshallah. As well, you can find the parental guidance.support. There's resources over there as well. And I'd like to give a shout out to the Launch Good campaign, which is presently there, and really encourage you again to donate to this very, very important cause. And people, you know, it's not something that people normally think about when they're donating to these causes. And Brother Yusuf has put this quite well. If you go to the page and Launch Good, that Stonewall gets millions, and they get millions from taxpayer money. It's actually taxpayer money which goes to organizations like this. Yet if we look for Islamic advice on this topic, all we get for resources, there isn't much, because we don't have that funding, or we don't have the support. So if you are watching this and you are interested in this and you're wondering why the Muslim Ummah isn't furthering in this, then please do support this work. It's vital. It's vital for this age. It's vital that we address this issue. We have so many cases I hear where, as is said here, where children are confused about their sexuality or their gender, and we don't have appropriate programs. So inshallah, Brother Yusuf, as he's put here, has put a list of action points, such as a maktab, resources for parents, khutbah templates that actually other people can use, other scholars can inshallah use, training which we need for this issue, podcast, books. I mean, there's so many things which really can be done for this, and the community is thirsty, as we know by people signing up to this webinar. The community is thirsty for this knowledge. So please do support this campaign. As well as that, on the parental guidance website, if you head to the Ramadan section, you will find that Brother Yusuf has been doing webinars, free webinars, which are addressing this topic. So the one actually tomorrow is on who is shaping your child values around sex and LGBT. So if you are interested, you can go to parentalguidance.support/Ramadan, and you can access that. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Brother Yusuf Patel.
الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد بن عبد الله خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. And Jazakum khairan to Brother Ali for setting this up and for inviting me in this month of Ramadan. So with this session, I wanted to briefly cover some aspects of RE or RSHE in schools, because parents often ask about that. I want to talk about 5 key actions that Muslim parents must take if we want to meaningfully respond to the impact of a hypersexualized society. And then really, because this is a more shorter workshop, I'll be providing some snapshots of those 5 key actions with just practical actions that we can take in relation to these 5 key areas. So in primary schools, I think one thing is to recognize and to realize that relationships and health education, which is a new subject that was brought into schools in September 2020, and then there was a later extension, that this is a statutory part of the curriculum of all primary schools. So relationship and health education is what all primary schools have to teach. So that means, and parents are sometimes quite shocked by that it means that state schools, as well as academies, free schools, as well as independent schools. So even if your children go to an independent school of whatever stripe, mostly a Muslim school, they'll still have to teach this at primary level. Obviously, there'll be some differences in terms of what a school can teach if it's got a religious ethos, but all schools have to teach this at primary level. And one of the things that parents are often shocked by is that sex education is not a statutory part of the curriculum, and so parents can withdraw from that. So every time whenever I go to events and speak to parents and they hear that, they said, "Wow, I didn't know that. I thought everything was statutory in a primary school." So it's really important that parents recognize that sex education is not statutory. And actually, relationship education, there are some aspects of relationship education where they'll talk about different types of families, Some families have two dads and some families have two mums, and so you will find that that's being taught in a primary school. But I think what I always say to parents is that sometimes it's very difficult to generalize what's happening in different schools across the country, and what's most important is that you speak to your child's school and find out information about what's happening there. In secondary schools, relationship, sex, and health education is statutory, but you can request withdrawal from the sex education element of sex education. For all the sex education topics that are taught as part of relationship, sex, and health education, you can seek withdrawal from that up until the age of 15, up until the age your child turns 15, after which they'll be given the option of whether to remain withdrawn or to opt in to that in their final year at secondary school. So I just want to basically, and obviously schools also have a legal responsibility to consult, and most schools don't do that very well. But what I want to talk about really briefly about schools is that obviously when I speak to parents and speak to teachers, Muslim teachers in schools, the reality is that for many schools, not all schools, for many schools, LGBT normalization has become, that schools have become an incubator for LGBT normalization. I hear from parents who say, look, what happens in schools is sometimes they have, in secondary schools, they have like almost LGBT clubs, which they really push and encourage people to attend. We have, and I think sometimes it's really important to separate what's taught within statutory subjects. So we say that you can almost shape what's taught in statutory subjects like relationship education or relationship and sex education in secondary schools. But sometimes a lot of the LGBT content or even other elements are taught within the everyday life of the school rather than within bespoke subjects. So we've got things like, I remember I went to a secondary school. I just visited a secondary school in I think it was in December, and so there was no LGBT History Month or Pride Month taking place then, and every single classroom had an LGBT flag. All the corridors had an LGBT flag, and I was thinking, what is the purpose for this? That all year round you have an LGBT flag, and that school has like 60% Muslim children in that school, and actually probably slightly higher than that. So in terms of what are they trying to project when they have these flags in that school? And I think when I speak to parents, sometimes it is the case that teachers can often reflect their own values in the classroom. So a teacher may not be married, may be in a relationship with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and they may reflect that in their classroom. So the values that they consider to be normal are the values that they project into the classroom and upon the children. And so that's one thing to recognize. But also the issue of LGBT is part of the Equalities Act, and people from LGBT backgrounds cannot be discriminated against. And when we speak about LGBT people, we don't say that we want to do harm to them. We like, there's in many of my workplaces that I've worked in, there'll be people from LGBT backgrounds in those workplaces. Now there's ways in which we can work together in terms of in the workplace. But what tends to happen at the moment is that there is a concerted effort to almost indoctrinate or really impose certain values upon children. And so LGBT rights and equality have been considered to be almost synonymous, and they're pushed as synonymous. So we can't achieve equality until LGBT rights are secured, when there are 9 protected characteristics, including faith and belief, and often schools do not take that into account. So one of the things that in terms of in school, when the government wrote the guidance around sex education in schools, RSC in schools, one of the things they said was that when we're looking at resources, when schools are considering resources, that they should take into account the age of children, and as well as that, the religious background of pupils at that school. And whenever parents ask, how have you taken into account the religious background of my child? Schools often cannot even answer that question because it's not even a consideration. And what I really say is that there has to be parental pushback on a lot of these issues. That when parents push back on some of these issues in a way which says, look, ask questions to schools, because a lot of the time schools are are implementing things that other schools are implementing. So they're just imitating what other schools are doing, and they're doing what is expected of them rather than having thought through why they're doing what they're doing. So sometimes when parents ask questions, it then opens up a conversation to schools and challenges them about what they're doing and why they're doing that. I'll give you one example before I move on to those 5 pillars that I talked about. That I remember just a few weeks ago, just before Ramadan, I got a call from a parent who said, "Look, I've got a problem. Can you help me?" Some people said, "Look, that you can maybe help me." I said, "Okay, what's the problem?" And she said that my son goes to a school which is over 80% Muslim children, a secondary school in London, and my son was part of an activity that took place as part of LGBT History Month. And an external organization had been brought in. And at the end of that session, they said to children, look, you can submit your questions. This is a safe space, submit your questions, and it's not a problem. Whatever you feel you want to ask, you can ask. So this young man, young boy, he's year 7. So he just really, last year he was in primary school. He's just made the transition to secondary school. So he's still a young child. So he's in year 7. So he wrote a question that he thought, okay, I want to ask a question. This is a safe space. I want to take advantage of that. So he said, my faith does not allow LGBT like same-sex relationships. So why am I being taught this? So it was just a question that he had in his mind. He asked it very respectfully. There was no discrimination in the wording. Just ask the question. There was a half-term break. They came back after half-term. The head of year came into the classroom and said, look, somebody submitted this question. She read the question out. Somebody submitted this question. This is really not acceptable. We want the child who wrote this question to come forward. Obviously, given the pressure that and the tone of the voice of the head of year, nobody would come forward and say, I wrote that letter. I wrote that question. The next day, the teacher came back and said, look, nobody has come forward. If no one comes forward in this class, every single person in this class will be given detention. It's almost collective punishment for that infringement, that discriminatory question as it was framed. And then what happened was that the teacher said, look, we want all the children in this class to now write down the name of the person you think wrote that question. And so children said, oh, I think it was this boy. So they managed to find out who it was. So they singled out that child, took him to another classroom, and one of the teachers came to the classroom and said, you know what you did was wrong, don't you? And the boy, really not out of anything other than being perplexed at the situation that he was being put in, said, look, I don't understand why what I did was wrong. And all the teacher did was not say, this is what I think you did was wrong. It just almost like he tutted and shook his head like, oh, this is unacceptable. You should know what you're doing. It's almost like a Kafka-esque situation, you know, where you're brought in front of you're accused of a crime, but you're never told what that crime is. And then so the parent called me and said, look, my son's virtually in tears. Yeah, he's so distraught. He doesn't know what he's done. What he's done is wrong. He doesn't know what mistake he made or what act he's committed that is that is worthy of him being singled out. Other children in the class are asking, what's going to happen to you? And so that's adding on pressure upon him. He's really doesn't want to go back to school. He feels like he feels just really upset and he doesn't know what he's done is wrong. What wrong he's done. So I said, look, stop. Don't follow up any verbal communication with the school. Respond in writing. I said, just note down all the things you've told me about what you think happened and ask the school to clarify that's actually what happened. So she wrote the letter. I helped her complete that letter, redrafted it, and she sent it to the school. She received a call immediately from the deputy head to say, look, we're very sorry. This was a mistake. This should never have happened. Your son did nothing wrong. So she said, look, what I want you to do, because we agreed that she needs to have specific demands, you need to make sure that the teacher in that class says to the whole class that what he did was not wrong. He didn't do anything wrong. We made a mistake. So they need to acknowledge that publicly to the class. And then secondly, you need to look at all the processes. What went wrong to such a level that that child was singled out for just an innocent question that he asked, to make sure that this does not happen again. And I want to know what you've done and the steps you've taken to make sure this doesn't happen again. And so and also whenever these sessions take place in future, I want you to make sure that you write to all parents so that they're aware of that before it happens. And so the school said, absolutely, we'll agree to all three of your requests, your demands, and they've implemented that. And then, alhamdulillah, that was a positive result. But what tends to happen sometimes is that parents don't push back. I speak to parents so often, and parents say, look, we had this problem in the school. I said, did you complain? And they said, no, I don't want to cause a fuss. But the problem is, unless parents push back, these things are going to happen again and again. And schools would then not be able to reflect upon things that they've made mistakes around and then to put those right. So really, there needs to be a much more parental pushback against a lot of these issues. And we need to find our voice as a community sometimes that we don't necessarily do. And otherwise we'll find these things escalate and these things will become normalized in schools, and the space for our children to express their views will ultimately become very narrow, and that's really not what we want, because it will eventually create a situation where children are one thing at home and one thing in the classroom, and that creates problems in the long run. So this is what I want to talk about today: the 5 pillars of parenting in a hypersexual society. So I want to give snapshots of all of these 5 things, and there's all, as Brother Ani mentioned, I'm delivering presentations on this throughout Ramadan. So I'll give you snapshots because I believe these are 5 really important areas that we need to develop in our children, and I hope you, inshallah, find it beneficial. So one thing is, I'm really keen to explore this idea of a Muslim child, having a firm foundation. Whenever I speak to young Muslims and I say, "Why are you Muslim?" Just as a general question, they say, "I'm Muslim because my parents are." Yeah, and that imitation makes children very weak. Yeah, imitation is that you are adopting a series of values, a set of values that your parents are living, but only because your parents have adopted those values. So essentially what you're saying is that if that child was born into a Hindu family, he'll adopt those values. If they're born in a Muslim family, they'll adopt those values. In a Christian family, they'll adopt those values. Or in an atheist family, they'll adopt those values. Alhamdulillah, we were born in Muslim families. But it's not enough just to say, I'm Muslim because my parents are Muslim, because that means that whenever the child faces any difficulties later on and people start questioning about what he believes, they'll create doubts in him. Oh, why do I believe that? So imitation is not a strong position for our children to be in. Similarly, from a point of view of we're going to require our children to live certain values that are different from the values that most people live by. Why should I fast? Why should I pray? Why should I cover? Why should I do this, this, and this? Why are the things that I'm required to do in life that set me apart from my peers, that make me different from my peers? Why should I do those? So unless our children understand why they do those, it becomes very difficult. And it's not that every single command that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislated has a reason which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave. A lot of those are reasons that are a matter of obedience. And because Allah is the creator and created us, He has defined for us how we live our lives. And sometimes human beings do not know what's best for them. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated actions that we should do. And so that requires that we have a deeper understanding of our conviction, not our faith. I find faith to be a word which is very wishy-washy. Indicates almost like we just believe in something. No, we have conviction in our foundation, but that needs to be set very clearly for our children. Similarly, the context in which our children live, that we live in a very not only a hypersexualized society, but a hypersecularized society, a society which really divorces the ultimate purpose for our life, or even the questions surrounding our purpose in life from life itself. So very, very few people do not really, most people when they're asked, do not ascribe to a religion, do not believe that they have a purpose that goes beyond just the fact that we are alive and we live our life and do various actions in our life, but there is no purpose beyond that. And so the reality is that the norms of society are different from our norms. In terms of from the foundation, from the fact that we believe that we have a higher purpose for our existence. And if our children do not understand why they are Muslim, inevitably there'll be problems in the future where they come across other ideas and they'll say, actually, those ideas are stronger than my ideas, because they haven't developed the strength in their own ideas, because they don't have that firm foundation. Ultimately, we have questions like, who created me, for what purpose, and how do these answers shape my very worldview? But we often start. So if we look at this, we got like the worldview, which has an idea, but which then develops into our rules and regulations, the laws at which we live by. We often start from the perspective of the rules, but we don't talk about why the Quran is divine revelation. Brother Ali talked about tadabbur in the beginning, about reflecting around the Quran, tafakkur, looking at the Quran from the perspective of meaning that it conveys, not just necessarily just the words that are in the Quran, which are divine, but how do our children look at the Quran? Yeah. And when they go to the maktab to learn the Quran, they read this book, which is quite divorced from their life because they're not conveyed meaning necessarily. It's just recitation and memorization, which are good and are important, but the Quran came as a guidance, and that guidance is contained within the meaning, within within what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought in terms of reminders, in terms of laws, in terms of reflection upon our existence, on the hereafter to come. All of those things sometimes are lacking in the way our children approach this Quran, this divine revelation. And then the divine revelation comes from comes from the Creator who created that, and we know the signs that exist around the Creator. The fact that we know for a fact 100% that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, because we can see the ayat around us that prove that fact. So I believe really it's really important for us to start that conversation with our children about why they're Muslim. Not necessarily just ask them, why are you Muslim, but to say, look, if somebody said to you, there is no purpose in life other than to acquire as much money as you want, and to be as happy in the life that you choose to live, the better. That's what life is for. How would you respond to that? So just trying to get them to think about connecting with why they're Muslim from a perspective which makes them empowered to understand why they're Muslim. Yeah. So even reflecting on the ayat of the Quran, Ibrahim al-Islam, the ayat of Ibrahim al-Islam, where he talks about he looked at the moon, he looked at the stars, he looked at the planets, and he saw that was his creator. But then he saw the limitations in those planets, and so no, these can't be my creator. My creator is free from all this. My creator is unlimited, is independent. There's certain issues, certain qualities that the creator has. And then there's a challenge of the Quran, which proves that the Quran is a divine miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the foundation of our worldview. So we need to start engaging our children in these discussions about the worldview, because this is the foundation of everything. We also, I find a lot whenever I speak to families and families in difficulty, families in difficulty come to me and say, look, I have a son who says, I don't believe in God anymore, or I have a son who says he's gay, or a daughter who wants to be a boy. Now, sometimes a child would adopt strange ideas or strange behaviors, not necessarily because they believe in them, but because there's a vulnerability there. There's a real vulnerability there. And I think a lot of the vulnerabilities, other than not having a firm foundation, stem from not being loved. And this is a hugely important thing. Yeah. And sometimes when I say this to people, they say, well, you think that's really that important? It's hugely important. A human being's desire to be loved is so foundational. It's so a part and parcel of who that person is, that if they're not loved, that builds a traumatic childhood, that builds a weakness in them. And so the first question is okay, whenever I ask parents, and they always say yes, of course. Do you love your children? Yes. Every parent loves their children from the first moment you pick them up, when they're born, and you hold them in your arms and you think, subhanallah, I could not imagine a love as deep as this. Yeah. For a child who's just been born, I didn't know this child a minute ago. It was hidden within the body of its mother. And so the father holds the baby and says, look, subhanallah, I've developed a strong relationship with my child I never knew. And that relationship just grows. That love grows and grows and grows. And research shows that, even for a father, the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created even the father, who's far removed from the growth of that child. The mother is connected to that child for 9 months, but the father is far removed. He's a spectator. He's a bit further away from that experience. So when the father, when the child is born, there are different hormonal changes in the mother, but even in the father, the testosterone level of the father drops. Yeah, it as almost to say, look, you now need to be nurturing to that child. You need to build that relationship with that child, and so the testosterone level of the father naturally drops. But the question comes: you love your child, but do your children know you love them? And they're two different parts. So you can say you love your child, but do your children know you love them? And that may seem like a strange question to ask, or a strange situation to almost express this idea of love. But love has to be conveyed through action. And there's this idea of 5 languages of love, languages where love is conveyed. And if the language your child understands love isn't the same language as the way in which you express love, then your child will never understand that you love them. Yeah. And as I said, once, for example, a father called me during the lockdown and said, and he called me from South Africa actually, because somebody else, he had some connection to here, and he said, look, I've got this problem. Can you help me? But I said, yeah, of course. What's the problem? So look, during the lockdown, my son said, look, I believe I'm gay. And I said to him, look, the first question I asked him wasn't give me descriptions about your family life in terms of your son. What is he saying? I said, look, let's put all of that aside. But first, just tell me a bit more about your relationship with your son. And he said, look, the reality is, and I regret this. He goes, look, the reality is my job took me away from my son and all my children. Yeah. So I used to leave home when they were asleep. And most days I'd come home when they were asleep. And so I never really managed to develop a strong relationship with them. I recognize that. And I'm trying to put that right because I've left that job now. I'm working close to home. I'm working reduced hours. So I've got more time for my family. So alhamdulillah, he was trying to rectify that situation. And it's never too late to rectify the situation. It's never too late to say, for 10 years, I've had this situation and that is now irreparable. Any situation can be repaired. So he was saying, look, now I'm trying to find out, I'm trying to develop a stronger relationship with my son. And I said, that's the most important thing. I said, you need to do things like say to him, you love him. Yeah. You need to hug him, you need to show him immense love. Yeah. Because children can feel, when children don't feel that love, it can make them do some strange things, some things which we do not like them to do. So it's almost like filling that void, adopting the strangest behavior, adopting or connecting with the strangest people or the strangest ideas, just to fill that void. Yeah. So I think you need to reestablish your relationship with your son as a starting point. Yeah. And at this point, don't even address the issue of what he's saying about himself. Yeah. Just love him. Yeah. And show that you love him. And this is why this is fathers, because this is the issue about love is not about mothers. Mothers love their children in a way that is so natural. But sometimes the cultural baggage in which us as parents, especially if we come from the South Asian community or even some African communities as well, sometimes we may struggle with showing love in a very visible way. Yeah, I remember my own experience growing up. I remember I would be hugged by my father twice a year without fail, and those were for the 2 Eids. And other than that, my father never expressed love in that way. But what he did was he worked long and hard hours outside of the home, working to put food on the table, clothes on my back, and to pay for the bills that and the house that we lived in. But children can't really connect all those things to love, because love needs to be given in a more visible way. And so we talked about the 5 languages of love. There's the physical love, touch, the hugs, cuddle, kisses, and pats on the back. There's the words of affection and endearment. So saying I love you, praising your child, say you did really good, well done for that, and encouragement. So all of the things that are almost around validation. And then quality time, spending quality time with your children, undivided time away from things which are distractions. And so spending time together in a way which is quality, which is just you and them, almost with eye contact, with doing things that they like to do. That's quality time. Giving gifts as a show of your love, not necessarily gifts which are very expensive, but gifts which convey value, convey love. And then finally, it's the acts of service, doing things which are your child sees as valuable. Yeah. So these are very whistle stop tour of the 5 languages, but just want to focus on the first one, like the physical touch. Yeah. Because sometimes, as I said, in our culture, we have this idea that fathers shouldn't show love. And sometimes we need to really look into this, that the way we often raise our children comes back to the way we were raised. And some of those anchors around parenting, some of those things that we fall back on, are things which our parents did raised us with, because naturally we fall back on our own experience, and our own experience is how we were raised. And sometimes, and a lot of those things, alhamdulillah, were good. We were raised very well by our parents, and they did a good job in raising us. But there's some things that we need to reflect on that didn't serve us well and won't serve our children well. And almost we've got to think about, how do we move out of that circle of parenting behaviors that didn't serve us well and won't serve our children well. And so we need to reflect back. And sometimes when parents say, look, when fathers say, look, I have never hugged my children ever, what do I do? I said, just hug them. Don't overthink it. It's just a simple act. I've never said to my child, I love you. Say to your child, I love you. Yeah. Even if you have to start by acknowledging that this is something that you never did before because you were never raised in that way, but you want to change and you want to express your love for your children in a different way. And I think one thing that's important is that children, whether they're 2 years old or 3 years old or 4 years old, even if they're in their teenage years, they still need love from their parents. And sometimes we try and maybe think that our children, by the time they reach 14 or 15, they no longer need us. They actually still need us. Maybe the way you convey that love will be different. Maybe if you try and hug them, they'll squirm and they'll try and move away from you. But they still need that love. They still need those words, those actions, that even that pat on the back. If they don't want that hug, a pat on the back that conveys love. And one thing is, just to follow an example, the Prophet once he was with a tribal chief called Al-Aqra ibn Habis, and he was kissing, the Prophet was kissing his grandson Hassan ibn Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. And so he was kissing his grandson, and this tribal chief Al-Aqra, he saw this and said, I've got 10 children, and it's like a boast. I've got 10 children and I never kiss any of them. And it was like, look, I'm such a man, yeah, and I've never kissed any of them. And the Prophet turned to him, yeah, and in a way which was a rebuke, but doesn't sound it in English maybe, but it was a rebuke. He said, "Man la yarham la yurham." Yeah, those who don't show mercy will not be shown mercy. Yeah, so it's a sign of mercy to kiss and hug your children. And obviously, the fact that the Prophet was doing it shows us this is how you do it, because he's our example for what we follow. And so sometimes when we think and reflect about how the Prophet was to his children, look at how he was to Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha. He used to kiss her between on the forehead, between the eyes, and he would do that regularly. And Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha was never under the misapprehension that my father doesn't love me. Yeah, she knew her father loved her. Yeah, she would walk into the room and he would make space for her, even if he was with her companions. Make space for her. Come and sit next to me. This is the way the Prophet showed us. This is how we should treat our children. This is how, with mercy and with love. And so if there's any example that we want to follow, it's the example of the Prophet. And so if there's almost like a tussle between our cultural baggage and the sunnah of the Prophet, we follow the Prophet's sunnah. And sometimes if it's not part of who we are, if we don't show love in that way, do it. Yeah, do it, because these sorts of behaviors can be learnt. Yeah, and it will strengthen our children. If they grow up knowing my father loved me, it makes it easier for them to navigate life, because they are confident in who they are, and their belonging is clear. They belong to a family where they're very, very much loved. as I said, this is a whistle-stop tour. That I could speak about this for hours, but I don't want you to get bored. And obviously, we've got some time. We want to keep some time for questions as well. So the last few, I'll really maybe go into not much as much detail about. Actually, this one I will, but the next two, I'll spend less time on that. Now, this question of what is normal, this idea of we also talk about normalization. There's normalization of behaviors, and I think I want us to look at what is normal. And what is normal is really just simply what most people do most of the time. Yeah, these our understanding. Like, for example, we queue at the supermarket because we have an idea of what's normal. Yeah, you wouldn't just jump the queue and stand in front of everybody and just push it on the queue, because that's not normal. That's not the right thing to do. We have an idea of what is normal by seeing what other people do and replicating that behavior, by imitating that behavior. Yeah, we know how we navigate society by what most people do most of the time. So what is normal is just that. Imagine if a child, the routine of the family for that child was that every morning for breakfast, you drink orange juice, and that's the done thing. Yeah, that's normal for that child because he's seen it done repetitively over a long period of time. That's what we do. Now he goes to visit a cousin's house and stays overnight for the first time ever. He's very excited to receive his glass of orange juice, which he believes every family has. Now that family has apple juice, and he thinks, "Wow, that's strange. I thought every family has orange juice," because that's for him what is normal. And we encounter this every day. Our children encounter this every day. So normal so now his idea of what normal is disrupted. He thinks, actually, okay, some families have orange juice, some families have orange juice, and then he'll go to a third family and they don't have anything other than milk. And so now his horizons have been broadened about what is normal. Another example to illustrate this point is, imagine if you had, and I had a situation one long time ago where some mice died under the floorboards in our home, and they were inaccessible. And when mice die, the stench is really foul. Yeah, so you go into the kitchen, you smell this smell every day, and you think, "Oh, this is disgusting." The reality is, after a while, you become so attuned to that smell that you almost don't know it exists anymore. You think, actually, you become so accepting or you've adapted to that smell, and it's become so normalized within your house because you smell it all the time that you no longer smell it. There's a time where you just don't smell it, and somebody walks into the house and, "Oh, what's that foul smell?" And you say, "What smell?" Because that's how normalization works. Sometimes people things have become so normalized that you don't question it. Yeah, why do we queue in the supermarket? Nobody asks that question. They just queue. Yeah, why is it that why do people have boyfriends and girlfriends? What do you mean, why do you have boyfriends? It's just normal. Why are some people why are some people in same-sex relationships? Why do some people identify as gay? It's just normal. People do it, and people accept the norms in society over time. And we could talk about how norms are created, about how the role of popular culture, the role of the media, the role of films and programs, and we could talk about peer groups and how they create norms. We could talk about how laws create norms in society, all of those things, but that's not as important at the moment as the fact that there's a normalization process. Yeah, and normalization process occurs amongst people when there are no opposing ideas, or that people don't disrupt that normalization process. It's just, we just do it that way. Everybody does it that way. We accept it. So when there's disruption, when there's stronger value-based messages around, so our children, if there's a lot of children who are growing up in a Muslim community whose parents have never said to them that, they may say to them, "Look, don't have a boyfriend or girlfriend," but they never talk about LGBT issues, or they never talk about certain other issues. They may say, you eat halal meat, and so that's become a norm. I don't drink alcohol, but other things, other aspects of life have never been discussed to such an extent where society has shaped the norms of those children. So whenever I get calls all the time from Muslim teachers in state schools or parents who say, "Look, there are children in my child's school, Muslim children, Muslim names from Muslim families, who say, 'What's wrong with being gay? What's wrong with boyfriend or girlfriends? Or what's wrong with a number of other issues?' Because their norms have been molded and shaped by the society around them." And similarly, I hear from maktab teachers who are from madrasas or maktabs, who say, when we speak about these in the class, there's some children, normally girls in the class, who say, look, this is unfair. You're being homophobic. It's unacceptable. Why are you being homophobic to people who are LGBT? They should be allowed to live life like they like, as they like. They should be themselves. Love is love. All of the normalization messages that we hear around them are things which are shaping our children's minds, unless there's some disruption. And that starts from the home, but also around the community. And unfortunately, in our community, these things are not discussed because there's a great fear. There's a great fear in our community that if you speak about these issues, you'll lose your job. You'll be sidelined. You might get prosecuted. There's some unfounded fears, and there's some founded fears as well. The LGBT lobby is too strong for us. If we do this, they'll disrupt our ability to live our lives as Muslims in this country. Whatever excuse that people give has allowed for the normalization of society to shape our children's normalization of these ideas. Now, I want to talk about some LGBT narratives, because it's really important for us to understand this so that we can convey them to our children. Yeah, we hear very often this idea of born this way or be who you are. Yeah, so we hear this idea of there's this Lady Gaga song "Born This Way" that became an anthem for the LGBT community. We are born this way. Yeah, even though there's no evidence to suggest that there's a gene that is linked to what they consider to be sexuality. Yeah, and even then they still say we're born this way, or be who you are. Now, who are you? Yeah, who are you is quite complex. Who are you is shaped by a number of different factors around us, our friends, our environment, the ideas that we adopt or imitate, the behaviors that we adopt or imitate. It's quite a complex process by which we develop into a person. But who you are isn't set in stone. Yeah, who you are at 10 is not who you are at 20. Is not who you are at 30, is not who you are at 40 or 50. People change. Yeah, we are not a sum total of some fixed things. And that's why, about 50 years ago, they used to believe that things you learn until up to the age of maybe sometimes 7, sometimes 10, sometimes 15, sometimes 16 were all that you'd ever be. And then people said, no, actually, neuroscience has come along to say, actually, that the brain develops connections late into your life. That is not something that's fixed. Nothing that's fixed in your mind. You could be a smoker for 50 years and you could quit smoking. You can be an alcoholic for a number of years. You could be addicted to alcohol and you can move out of the alcoholism. Yeah. But there is a convention around what they consider to be what they say is sexuality. That they say this sexuality is hardwired. It's within you that can't change, even though everything else in your life can change. Everything can change. There's this idea of growth mindset that you can change anything about your life, but what they call sexuality. And we say no. The issue is that the LGBT phenomenon is a product of a very Western experience around what is sexuality. There's a very unique experience and history around LGBT people were oppressed and were stopped from living a particular life that they wanted to live. And so this whole idea around is sexuality came from a very Western, a very Eurocentric history. But that's not necessarily our history. Yeah, that's not necessarily something that we've been through as well. And we have a different understanding of behavior. We say there are attractions or there's desires that people feel. Those don't define who you are. Yeah, they don't define who you are. Just because you have a particular attraction to another person, that doesn't define who you are. And as well as that, the behavior that is built on desires propel you to behave in a particular way. But a behavior based on desire is a choice and it's controllable. Yeah. So for example, I may see a car that I really like, and that car is something that is connected to my desire for ownership. Yeah, and material ownership. So I want that car so much, but I know that there's certain rules around what can enable me to own that car. I own that car by buying it for my own money, not by stealing it from somebody else. We have desires, we have behavior, and all of this is controllable. Desires may not be controllable. Desires may come into the mind and may be quite strong. And I'm not trying to undermine or devalue the power of a desire because they can be very strong. But whether you act upon them or not act upon them is a choice. And what the LGBT narratives say to us is that there aren't choices. Yeah, I want to be me. I want to be who I am. This is who I am. Not rather these are the behaviors that I have chosen to act upon. Yeah. Now, if you don't have a particular belief about life and you believe that it's okay to be in a same-sex relationship, that's fine. You be in a same-sex relationship. Yeah. We live in a free society where people can decide how they live their lives. But the issue is that as a Muslim community, we believe in certain values. We believe that there's certain desires that propel us to do action, but those actions, we're not hostage to those desires. And those desires can allow us to either act upon them or not act upon them. And we don't believe in this idea of sexuality in a way that a Western understanding of sexuality is built. And we believe that suppression of desires is not necessarily negative, like in the West. They believe that if you suppress your desires, that's negative, that's bad, but you should be able to live your desires. But actually, we believe that suppression of desires is a basis of our submission. Like in Ramadan, who would want to starve themselves throughout the daylight hours? Who would want to stop eating and drinking during the daylight hours? When I speak to people in the workplace and say, I'm fasting, they say, I couldn't do it. I really couldn't do it. I don't know how you can do it. Yeah. I said, look, if you have the correct motivation to do something, yeah, then you can do anything. Like somebody who wants to climb a mountain, yeah, because they want to conquer that mountain because they see it as a personal aspiration, yeah, they will do it, even though it may seem to be such a mammoth task. The one who has a health condition that stops him from being able to eat certain foods, he will say, okay, I really like that food, it's my favorite food, but I'm going to suppress my desire for that food. Even though it's there, that desire is still there and it's still strong, I'm not going to act upon it because it's in my best interest. We do that every single day. We suppress either whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim. And as Muslims, we do it every day because we recognize that we are answerable to a higher power who defines for us how we live our lives. And one of the things that I'm really keen on exploring, I want to look at much more, and just is this idea of, how Tawbah, the idea of repentance, disrupts the normalization process. Because the issue is we recognize human beings are not perfect. Yeah, we will have these desires that sometimes take over us to such a way that we act upon those desires, and that's where we commit sin. And human beings err, and we commit sin as a natural consequence of our lives. We don't. It's not that that we're all perfect and we don't commit sin. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala recognizes that human beings are imperfect and we commit sin. And actually, if we didn't commit sin, Allah will replace us with people that do commit sin. Because Allah loves for his servant to approach him as a repenter, through repentance, through tawbah. And so I think the tawbah disrupts that normalization process, because that you have that desire. Sometimes you act upon it, sometimes you don't. When you act upon it, the first thing that we're taught to do when we commit a sin is to make tawbah, because not only is that a regret for that action, yeah, because that regret makes us remember that action is abnormal, that is not the norm, it's not a good thing. And so we say that's a bad thing. So that's a regret. And also we make the intention not to turn back to that. And we ask Allah to forgive us for that, for sinning against him. So Tawbah acts as a repentance process, as a demonstration of this is not normal. And I was just reading an article this week. Someone was saying in an article that, look, when will it be okay to be Muslim and gay? Yeah, like there was somebody who wrote the article to say, look, I'm a lesbian, I'm a Muslim, I'm Pakistani. These are all parts of my identity, and nobody should take an aspect of my identity away from me. And so she was saying, look, there's nothing wrong in either of in any of those three labels or those identities, whether I'm Pakistani or Muslim or lesbian. But the point is that the basis of our life is submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that human beings will consider things as good or bad, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what's good. And Allah says in the Quran that there may be things that you like which are bad for you. There may be things which you like which are bad, which are good for you. Allah knows, you know not. There may be things that you ascribe value to as good or bad. Now we don't know. You don't know whether they're good or bad. And human beings, we have a very limited understanding of focus about what is good and bad. And therefore we say only Allah knows what is good and bad for us, because we have such a short-term view, or such a narrow view about what is good and bad for us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what's good and bad for us. So sometimes when we speak to people who are struggling, there may be Muslims who are struggling, and we need to be very merciful and very very kind towards the people. Sometimes in the past, when a Muslim would come and say, look, I have these feelings, and people would start labeling them and say, oh, you're gay, you're this and that. That is the worst. That is not only an act of sin, because that encourages a Muslim who's struggling, who's asking for support, into a community, into an action, which will convince them that that is better off to be that than to struggle. So we need to, and that's why things like what Brother Ali is doing in terms of the strong support circles are so important now. I mean, when I found out about them, I was so pleased. I was so happy about that, because we often don't have avenues in our community where people can go to when they're struggling, to be welcomed and supported. And that's what we need, more of those. And so rather than narrowing that space, and rather than pushing people into those into choosing, we need to provide support, and that's why these strong support circles are so important in that. I remember I spoke to an imam once, and it was a really good conversation. He was saying, look, there was a boy who came through our HIFS program, and now he's on our Alimiya program, and he came to me once and said, look, I've had feelings for other boys for such a long time, and but I know that I can never act upon them, because I want to please Allah. I know the purpose of my life, and I'm never going to act upon those. But I wanted you to know this is how I feel. And he was like, this is really good. This is what you're doing, is a huge jihad. May Allah help you and support you in that. And I'm glad you told me. Yeah. And he started to give that boy more responsibility. He made them imam, leading the salah, because we cannot in any way underestimate how difficult it is for our Muslim brothers and our sisters who are going through this difficulty, this test in their lives, but they are meeting that test head on, and they're struggling for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Their position with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so high, and so we need to do whatever we can to support them, inshallah. So when we speak to our children, one thing I think we need to do is stop using these terms gay, lesbian, bisexual as though they are they're factual positions of what they call ontology, they're states of being. Yeah. So when we say some people are gay, we are saying that they're almost states of being, rather than behaviors which are changeable. When someone says he is gay, you almost put that person into, you pigeonhole them into a position where this is who they are. Not this is sum total of my behaviors or my desires that I can choose to act upon or not. So we need to move away from that. Say he is gay or he's lesbian or she, whatever. You can say that someone identifies as gay or lesbian, but that's not who they are. Who they are is not the sum total of their behavior or their desires. Yeah. And so I think we need to move away from those types of labels, and say people, we all have desires. Yeah. And the issue is the reason why I'm saying this is because also, some people are born with brown skin or darker skin or black skin. This is part of who they are. They can't change that. And sometimes the LGBT lobby want to portray that these desires or these behaviors as the same as skin color, for example. And this is completely wrong to put those both onto the same level. Yeah, where one is behavior you can choose, and one is what you were born with. And the reason why I'm saying this is because imagine a young Muslim. Yeah, one young Muslim starts to struggle and says, "I have these desires," as young Muslims will. Yeah, and it will become a greater and greater phenomenon. A young Muslim will say, "Look, I have these same-sex desires." Now, if the community is saying some people are gay, they'll say, if I have this desire, that means I'm gay. But rather, if they say, I have this desire, that means I can choose how to act upon it. So if we reframe the narrative and talk in terms of desires and behaviors rather than states of being, then also we make sure that we don't automatically say, you feel this, you must be this. And then when we discuss with our children, we need to discuss it in that way as well. Yeah. And I think the fourth one should probably be the first one, making dua, because sometimes I think we underestimate the power of dua. Dua is so important that it should be almost the center stage of our behavior as a parent. Yeah. And dua almost gives the impression, it actually does, that we are not in control of the guidance of our children. We're not in control of everything, anything really. Yeah. Rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control of everything. So so who should we ask for help? We should ask for help the one who's in control of everything, the one who can move mountains quite literally. Yeah. The one who created us from nothing, the one for whom nothing is impossible. I remember I was speaking to an elderly relative just last week, and he was speaking about his son who says he's an atheist, and who doesn't believe in Islam, and yeah, he's hanging around with other people who are atheists. So he was saying to me, look, what can I do for him? I said, look, the best thing you can do for him is make dua for him, yeah, and put your affairs in Allah's hands. And he was saying, look, what's dua gonna do? I said, look, it can do everything. Dua can do things if you sincerely make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, believing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will answer your dua, yeah, and placing your affairs in Allah's hands. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can change hearts, can change everything. And rather than asking Allah as a last resort, it's a daily act. Yeah. And there was research I read a long time, quite a few years ago, that talked about that if children who have a strong connection to their religious the religious practice, and also who find it easier to overcome risky sexual behavior, promiscuous behavior, so that they had a strong relationship to a God who answers back. Yeah. So that is essentially dua, because in every aspect of our life, in salah, we say things as a matter of ritual. Obviously it's hugely important. Salah is really important, but it's an act which is very fixed. You say certain things at certain times, you do certain actions. But with dua, it's different. Dua is where you are personally spilling your guts to Allah. You are asking Allah for help with the innermost desires, your innermost feelings, which nobody else knows apart from Allah anyway. So you're using words and languages, words and phrases that come from your heart. Yeah, you're saying in your own language, "Oh Allah, I'm struggling with this. Help me." Yeah, this is not the same as any act of worship. Any other act of worship is very regimented. Is very strict in terms of what you can and cannot say. But in dua, you can say anything to Allah. You can ask Allah for anything and help for anything. So it creates a personal connection and conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where you're asking him in a way that is reflective of your own words. And there's a hadith of the Prophet where he talks about 3 prayers are undoubtedly answered: the prayer of the one who is wronged, the prayer of the traveler, and the prayer of the father for his child. And therefore, being one of those most often accepted dua, really make dua for your children all the time, especially for their guidance, for their security, for their protection, for them to be rightly guided and upright Muslims. And I think really keep doing that, and do it constantly, consistently. Do it as an act that you always ask dua for. You make dua for them, for the good in this life for them, and in their akhirah. And the final one I really want to talk about is leading by example. Yeah, and this is really important. We need to lead by example. Children follow what we do more than what we say. So we've got to model the behaviors, live our values, and the first experience of life for your child in terms of in a relationship is what they observe of their father and mother. Yeah, that's the first understanding of a relationship, and therefore we need to make it we need to send a strong message to the way we interact, the way the father interacts with the mother, the way the mother interacts with their father, the respectful language that he uses to his mother, the gratitude that he shows to his wife, the mother of his children. And they're saying that, that there's a saying that I came across a long time ago. It's really, I found it really powerful. It said the best thing you can do for your daughter is to love her mother. And I found that, that stuck with me, and I use it all the time because I found it's really powerful, and it's really important because the way we as fathers give the way we treat our wives, the way we treat the mother of our children, sends a message to our children about their future relationships, about for our daughters, who they expect to marry in the future and how they expect to be treated. And so they often say, children girls who have been mistreated in childhood will often repeat those relationships in later life. They'll be mistreated in their relationship because almost they search for somebody who almost replicates the way they've been treated before. It's not like a chance factor. They'll just find people who treat them badly and treat them mistreat them, either physically or emotionally. And so we need to up the bar for our children to say, look, this is you should expect more, because this is how your mother was treated by me. And I really see raising children as almost a developmental opportunity for us. Yeah, none of us are perfect. None of us are. When none of us are perfect parents, we all make mistakes. I do all the time. Yeah, so I'm not here standing in front of you, sitting in front of you as someone who's almost perfect as a parent, who's done everything right, and therefore I'm saying this is a masterclass in how you should raise children. No, I'm talking to you as a father who makes mistakes every single day. You ask my children, they'll tell you I make mistakes every day, but inshallah I try to be better, and I try to improve, and I try to inshallah be a better parent for my children every day. Finally, just one thing before we move on to questions. Apologies, I've taken longer than I expected to. Really, these are things that we need to embed in our approach to our children so that they can come to us and we can discuss issues around sex relationships, LGBT with them in a very open way. Firstly, we give them permission to ask anything. Yeah, give them permission. Unless we give permission to our children, they will not come to us with the questions that we want them to come to us with. Sometimes our children develop an idea of questions I can ask my parents and questions I can't. Yeah, if I ask this question, I know I'll receive a negative response because they've tested the waters earlier on and they've seen how we responded, and they don't ask my father. Don't ask my father this. You can ask him about maths and science and about some sort of factual reality, but not about sex and LGBT issues. No, these sort of things we don't discuss in the home. Yeah. So almost we need to give permission to almost start the conversation about children by saying, come to me and ask me any question. Yeah. And when they do come to us, sometimes we get flustered because the question can be quite difficult. We may not know how to answer it straight away. We haven't really rehearsed every single question our children are going to ask us. So we don't need to respond immediately. We can say, look, come back to me later and I'll answer it. And so we answer it later. Then that's absolutely fine. That gives you time to reflect on how to answer it, maybe time to speak to your husband or your wife about how to answer it. And that's really important. Also using teachable moments, using reality. Sometimes we come across news articles about different things that happened, stories about people who have done certain things. These are excellent teachable moments. They're organic moments that you can use to say, these are the things that we believe in, we don't believe in. These are the values that we want to nurture in ourselves. Why did that person do that thing? Yeah. What made them do that? Yeah. And why don't we do that? It allows us to reflect on behavior and almost learn lessons from them in a very organic way. Sometimes we initiate things with our children. Sometimes we start conversations, and sometimes we respond to things that they come to us with. But when we do, I think it's really important to build our children's approach to these issues is to create a dialogue with them. Ask them questions. Ask them, what do you think about that? What do you think the answer is? Yeah, not so that you want to deflect or not answer the question, but you want them to start thinking creatively about the questions that they come to us with, so that they're not just rely upon us to give them answers. And finally, one of the good questions to help in those discussions is ask them, what do you mean? Ask them, if they ask you a question, ask them, what do you mean, to narrow down and to just give us some understanding of what they're asking. Sometimes we may respond to an answer we believe they've asked rather than they've asked. And that gives us an ability to maybe narrow down into what they're actually asking. And also, where did you hear that? Where did you hear that? And all these questions should be asked in a very neutral tone, not as in an accusatory way. What do you mean? Or where do you hear that? We should think about the tone of our voice, because the tone of our voice enables us to be welcoming to that question. And so where did you hear that enables us to understand the influences around our child? Where's our child? Where are our children getting those influences from? Or is it from a friend, from a TV program, from someone else? It just helps us to understand where the influences are coming from, whether the positive influences or negative influences. So I've taken up too much of your time, and I think it's probably time for Q&A. So I'll stop it there, inshallah. And so feel free to ask about any other things that I've raised or anything else that's on your mind, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan for listening.
Thank you, Brother Yusuf, for that comprehensive 5 pillars, as you said, mashallah. And I love how practical it is. So under each pillar, you've given practical advice on that. And I've been, and I know as people have been listening, sat reflecting, that it has been normalized to an extent that we're almost scared even to talk about it, because we say, oh, it's everywhere, and just expressing our belief, what Islam, what the Quran says, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, it has become difficult today. So I think it's and I've just been reflecting, if we maybe even go back maybe 50, 60 years, it wasn't what it is today. And so you're correct that we've gone through a process of normalization, a process where actually a sexual behavior is now considered a protected characteristic at the same level as race. And if we kind of say, well, some people change, or some people experience changes in their sexuality, they will say, no, that's not possible because it's a protected characteristic, so you're born with it, so absolutely, we have it's been normalized to such a level that we even us as Muslims, we're very scared of the topic. So thank you, and may Allah bless you for the work and the courage, because I think it, like I'm just saying, it requires a lot of courage to speak the truth, to speak for Islam, and to help. So we have inshallah opportunity, as Brother Yusuf said, for Q&A. The format for this is, you see the Q&A option at the bottom. You can ask questions, you can ask them anonymously if you wish to. Alternatively, you can raise your hand. If you raise your hand, you can ask question via audio. Just be aware that this is streamed live on Facebook, so your name will appear on that if you choose to do that. So yes, you can write your questions. One of the questions I have, just to start, is in terms of, if, say, I'm a parent and my child is now approaching the age of puberty, or or we would call it the talk, right? So some parents call it, or how do I start that? And if I'm a parent which hasn't really had a very close relationship with my child, how do I approach this sensitive topic in the right way?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think I'm a big critical. I'm a big critic of this idea of the talk, because the talk almost gives this idea that it's one occasion where you discuss it. You've never discussed anything before, and then on one occasion you discuss it. And those sort of things, because they're high pressured situations for both you and your child, I don't really think that's very effective. Yeah. The issue is, first of all, think about having these conversations in almost bite-sized chunks over a period of time, rather than over a longer period of time. And I think things like, talk also focuses upon the mechanics and the biology of issues, these sort of things. And I think that's not as that's important to one extent, but what's more important is almost the conceptual framework around these issues, yeah, around this idea of family, around why we do what we do, around the issue of relationship between the different genders, how we interact with each other. All of these issues that surround that, almost the conceptual framework around that, is more important. When you talk about relationship, I think that is a key point. If in order to be able to influence your children, you do need a strong relationship. And I think relationship is one of those things that can be built at any point in time. Yeah. So if you haven't built a relationship, I think relationship is a prerequisite for these sort of things, because I think our children will not be able to, will not really listen to us properly around these issues unless we have a strong relationship with them, because these conversations have to come from a position of love. Yeah, not from a position of hierarchy. I'm your parent, you're my child. It's almost, it's like all of these things I'm talking to you about. Yeah, even the things that you think I'm asking you to do, that you think is depriving you of living your life as your friends do, comes from a position of love. It comes from a position of me as a father wanting the best for you as my child. Yeah, because you have lots of people in your life, lots of friends and whoever, but I'm here for you all the time because I want what's best for you. I've got no vested interest in anything other than you having the best life possible, and that includes your link to the hereafter. Yeah. So I think first of all, relationship has to be there. Yeah. And think of these things in chunks. But I think what's really important is to make these conversations more organic. Is, because we live in a society where these sexual discussions happen all the time. Yeah, including things that happen at school. So if they're going to school and they're hearing things, even daily ask the question, how was school? What happened? And give them the opportunity to raise issues. And with that, they will say things. That boy said that. And you can, off the back of that, have organic conversations, which are really more effective than just saying, today we're going to talk about this. Yeah. It's like almost like a classroom lesson, which really doesn't work. You need to find inroads to have organic conversations. And there are some times when you need to have other discussions. Say, look, even like for puberty, for example, our children need to understand what's going to happen to them in puberty in a way which is organic, but happens well before it happens. And I think even within the Islamic framework, Islamic fiqh, you can, like you talked about, for example, in the beginning when you're talking about those verses, there's certain times of day where people are changing, where you should knock before you enter. And that opens up a conversation around that. There's issue around tahara, about cleanliness, where before they're going to pray, they clean themselves, including their private parts. You can have a discussion that centers around those sort of issues. And even within the tafsir of the Quran, there's look at the issue of the story of Yusuf Islam. Yeah, Yusuf Islam, there was an encounter where he said he was attracted to the woman who called him towards a sexual relationship, but he fought his desires, and with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he repelled that approach. Now you could have a conversation about that as in terms of desires. Yeah, there's the Islamic fiqh. One of the things about the Islamic approach to these things is that it's quite open about these issues. Now it uses euphemisms in a lot of senses, but in terms of it's much more open about these conversations than maybe other religions are. And so sometimes the things that stop us from discussing these issues are cultural things. If you think about the Prophet, he used to say that blessed are the women of Medina, of the women of Ansar. They would have no shame in asking about the details of their religion. They would ask him questions about issues in the bedroom. They would ask him questions about sexual issues. And the Prophet had no qualms about answering that for them, because that was in relation to them living their lives as Muslims. So firstly, we've got to challenge our preconceptions about what is possible to discuss with our children. We've got to also get out of our mind this idea that certain ages where you discuss things, there's no such age where you say at 5 I discuss this, at 6 I discuss that. No, sometimes we may need to have discussions before their time, before we think that we're comfortable discussing those, because our children are approaching realities which bring to the fore these discussions. So they're learning certain things at school, they're in a certain peer group where these things are being discussed. So taking all of those into account, there needs to be a much more organic approach to that. So that you can't say that there's a certain age range at which certain things should be discussed. No, you discuss things in an organic way, reflecting the context that surrounds our children. And sometimes you need to have discussions earlier than we hope that we maybe like. And so I think better than the talk, you have those bite-sized conversations at different stages. LGBT issues, for example, are all around our children. Yeah, we can say, what do you know about LGBT? Or, you know, what are you learning about LGBT in school? As a means of a discussion where you're asking him, your son or your daughter, as a way of starting that conversation.
Yeah, I love that. I love the fact that as you say, it needs to be organic, because children are finding at a time that we didn't find when it was all, when we were growing up. So definitely. We have a question here by Rasneen. So Sister Rasneen is saying, as a mum, should I only kiss my son on forehead, or can I kiss on cheeks?
You could convey your love in both of those ways. Yeah, you can hug your son. You know, the issue is that yeah, you obviously your if it's, you know, if kissing your son is something that your son's grown up with, it'll become so normal for him that he'll always accept that. Now, for example, in public with his friends around, he'll probably like squirm and say, "Don't kiss me in public." Yeah, but in private, you can kiss your son on the cheeks, or on the forehead, anything which you feel conveys your love for him. Yeah, and that's the main thing, because a kiss is just a kiss, but it conveys love. Yeah, when you say to your child, "I love you," when you say to your child, you use words which show that you're proud of what he's achieved in terms of the effort he's put into something. Yeah, then you're conveying love. So it's absolutely fine. Yeah, absolutely fine to kiss your child on the forehead or the cheeks, to hug your child, to convey your love to your child, because that love builds the emotional stores of your child, and makes them stronger as a person for your. And then you need to also convince your father, your husband as well, to show, if he doesn't already, I'm sure he does, but if he doesn't already, kiss your son, hug him as well, and show that he knows that that his father loves him just as much as his mother does.
Absolutely, yeah. And yes, questions can be asked via the audio facility as well. I completely agree. And we know we had our last webinar where we talked about the importance of touch and physical touch. And you mentioned the Chapman's love languages, and how really, I think even still in our community, we have this, especially with the fathers, this macho-ness where, oh, yuck, you know, I'm not going to kiss my child. This is weird. This is odd. And there's been so many studies which have proven the necessity of touch, on how children who grew up without healthy touch have been hugely affected. And we find that even in our work, we find that a longing. So people who have the same sex attraction are longing healthy touch. It's even though that has then become sexualized after puberty, when the core need was just a healthy touch. So I have so many in our circles, we discussed like men asking, okay, how do I get more hugs, or how do I get that physical touch, even as a from their parents or from the community. And I think it's definitely something which is sometimes overlooked, also how much you can communicate just through physical affection. And you know, as parents, sometimes we may not have all the answers, we may not have, but what we can show is, I think, is one of your pillars was to show love. And there's so many different ways that we can show that we support them, and we love our children. And the physical display of that is very, very much important. you were sharing your own experience of your upbringing, and I think most of us who have, myself, who've been raised in traditional type of upbringing, I would say even in the Arab culture or South Asian culture, there has been this deficit of children remembering. We would ask this group, and whenever I ask people who struggle with same-sex attraction, do you remember your father hugging you? And they will say no, they don't remember these moments. And I think it's such a small behavioral change as a parent, which can have huge benefit for the child.
You know what we need to do, Ali? We should join forces and do like almost campaign in the Muslim community. Yeah? It's the love campaign. Yeah, with a simple message. You can imagine we had khutbahs from on the Friday. We had materials where simple messages: hug your child, kiss your child, tell your child you love them, spend quality time with your child. Convey love to your child in a way which shows them that you love them. Yeah, I reckon. My feeling, my belief is, if we were just to deal with that one thing, where fathers especially show love to their child in a visible way, we could deal with a huge amount of problems in our community. Yeah, even without addressing any of the other issues, just that one behavioral change would have a huge impact on the lives of children. And that's what that's what I did a khutbah yesterday in the masjid where the whole issue was about an example of the Prophet where a boy came to him and asked him for permission to commit zina. Yeah, but I want, and I was in the past done khutbahs on loving your child. But if we can get these behaviors changed and the outlook of fathers changed so that they start visibly loving their child, I do reckon that some of the issues that we're seeing as quite intractable problems in our community that's storing up huge major problems for the future will be nipped in the bud. Not everything, but I think a whole host of problems will be dealt with, inshallah.
Absolutely. And do you think that a lot of the issues we're seeing today is because the breakdown of the family unit, and because, in Islam, the family unit is absolutely central to, as you mentioned, the Prophet, how he was as a father, as a husband, how he treated his wife, how he treated his children, and we see from the Prophet, from the Sunnah, on how to raise a family, and the nuclear family of what a mother is, how children should behave in front of that. And I think that's that very core of Islam, and it's core of our of our identity as Muslims. The Quran says that after Allah, parents have the highest authority. So we have we have a religion which has great emphasis. They say that the biggest foundation in Islam is marriage, for example. And what we're seeing is almost as those roles, and the LGBT is a great example where that role of family is being hit at, that we are seeing a lot of these issues.
No, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I think there's the issue of families, but I think even in a family where there's a husband and a wife, a father and a mother in the household, where very often when I speak to mothers, they talk about fathers which are who are emotionally disconnected from their children. Just being physically present has benefits that research shows us. They said that just the father's just the fact that a daughter lives in the same household as a biological father means that she doesn't go through premature puberty. Yeah, but a girl who grows up without a biological father in the household goes through puberty earlier, which is from the research from the States. But so we've got one issue of fathers emotionally distant from their children, but they live in the same household as their children, and then we've got fathers who are separate from the household, which also is a problem. Which is, as I said, the breakup of the family. Now, just because the family breaks up, it doesn't mean that the life chance for that child, or that the chance of that child to be nurtured still doesn't exist. That fathers can still be an important part of that child's life, and still provide that emotional support for that child, even though the parents are separated. Obviously, communicate to that child that the separation of the mother and the father is not necessarily to mean that the father has separated from the children. They're two disconnected things, and sometimes children will see that just because my father has left the home, he's left me, and something, it's my fault, or he doesn't love me anymore, or things. And a father will sometimes then, in that situation, try to overcompensate by buying the child lots of things, and then the child will feel like, is the father trying to buy? Is my father trying to buy my love? And so there's a whole host of issues there. But I think obviously in the past, one of the problems is that there is breakdown in family. There's a concerted attempt and effort to destroy families. And also there was it's just a modern phenomenon, this idea of the nuclear family. You know, in the past, and even in Muslim countries now, this idea of the nuclear family is taking shape, but it's not how it was in the past. Children used to be brought up by a wider family, isn't it? It's be connected to wider family who are close together. People have become disconnected now, family living far away from each other, and so support networks aren't there. And so we have this idea that it takes a village to raise a child. This idea that the child had influences beyond just the father and mother. They had the extended family, the grandparents, intergenerational influence, and the wisdom of generations would influence a child being raised. But I think the issue is that there are a whole host of issues. We need to recognize that there is definitely a concerted effort. The LGBT groups have an avowed hatred of the family structure. They've worked in even in the UN and other bodies to try and undermine the family in different ways. We know that, and so definitely we need to see that going forward. We have many structures within our community. We have the masajid, we have organizations and things, but there's nothing that's going to be more important than the family going forward. Yeah. And so we've got to find ways in which we can strengthen the family, because that family is the place in which a child is nurtured, the tarbiyah takes place, the love exists for that child. And so that is so important going forward, because when the society around us is in chaos, it's that family structure that will provide that security, that grounding for the child. And so we need to invest in that structure. Otherwise, the same problems that are happening across society will inflict and affect our families as well.
Brilliant. I'd like to also ask about we mentioned the Launch Good campaign and your work, which you're hoping, like you say, would be happy to join forces on this, whatever we can do. Could you tell us a bit about what you have plans for or in the future?
So I want to be, because parents say they struggle, they're not. First of all, one thing is, whenever I have workshops or events in different parts of the country, online or whatever, I always say to the attendees, usually people who attend are not the people that need those messages the most. Sometimes people that don't attend, and you probably know this as well, sometimes the people that don't attend need it more than anybody else. And so trying to get through to people who don't necessarily who not necessarily attend these sort of things, trying to find ways of accessing these families, because these messages, like loving your children in a very visible way, are things that could really benefit from everybody. But if people aren't getting those messages, so one thing I'm looking at is for khutbah templates, providing a whole suite of khutbah templates, and even training for imams to be able to address these issues in our communities. Sometimes when I pick up the phone to somebody who said, my local imam has asked, said you could help with this. But really, if imams could actually deal with some of these issues at a pastoral level, and because they've got connection to the community, they've got influence and leadership in their community, they can be very effective in these types of issues. And so maybe providing some support for imams, khutbah templates, so that we can try and address these issues, especially reaching people who attend the mosque maybe once a week, and who are not necessarily a part of the community in the sense that they're regularly attending activities. This is the one message that they can get during the week. So trying to amplify that the voices on that day for those people. Trying to find almost resources that we can create for parents to use for their children, to make it easier for them to have these conversations, but also recognizing that that there are lots of parents who won't have these conversations with their children, who will not have these conversations. So the society will be raising their children to a certain extent. So using the maktab programs, and the program can be used in any community setting, and almost trying to create resources that are interactive, that almost are lesson plans that someone can look at who hasn't got any teaching experience and just say, I can deliver this to those children with very limited understanding of any, just follow step by step, do this, say that, do that, and engage the children in this conversation around this. And these are the potential answers that you're looking for. So really providing a tailor-made resource for children to be interactively approached around these issues, that which issues around why you're Muslim, issues around social media, peer pressure, pornography, issues around LGBT, issues around sexual relationships, all the things that we know our children need to understand, but are maybe are not being their needs aren't being met around the answers to these questions in a very interactive way, but allows them opportunities to raise questions in an open atmosphere. Like we've done it in a lot in mosques, where we've allowed children, where we've had like almost scenarios which bring together children to understand sexual issues from an Islamic perspective, and children have gone in ways that I didn't know I could discuss this. I didn't know I had permission to talk about this in the mosque in front of the imam, because we sometimes build those barriers, say you can't talk about these issues. Thinking about also what we can do to almost create resources for parents and also for children, even creating a series of videos for children that speak directly to children about these issues that they can access, that give them our perspective on these issues. So really just providing a whole host of resources and tools for different aspects of the community to use with for our community, for parents, for children, and whatever setting that they're in, inshallah.
Inshallah, and may Allah strengthen you and support you in this very vital jihad. I would say it's a huge struggle at the moment to provide guidance in this time, guidance which is loving, which is really God-centric, which is taqwa, and it's not self-driven. You know, we find a lot of these, unfortunately, a lot of what's in the education is very self-centric, and it's all about individual, how to please the individual. How can I please myself? How can I, you know, we live in a very individualistic society, which is very liberal. And when Islam comes in, talks about taqwa, talks about God centricity, talks about community, talks about rights of other people. It's a very it's a difficult concept sometimes for Muslims to grasp at times. But no, thank you so much. I think people who cannot have questions, see, it's a question by Sister Raslina again, which is saying, could you elaborate and give scripts for the subjects covered? So yes, so the website, I was just about to say, the website is SREIslamic.org. You can also find Brother Yusuf's email over there on the website, where you can contact him directly if you wish. You don't want to discuss the question in this webinar because it's live, but please do engage if you do have a question. Again, SREIslamic.org. You can ask Brother Yusuf, and you can engage. Yes.
But the question Sister Raslin asked is really important about scripts, almost having scripts. I think that's something that we want to create as well, like almost having exemplar ways of answering questions, almost having almost detailing like 100 questions that children could generally ask about all these issues. What are the pointers that you can use to answer those? So not obviously you wouldn't just say read out the answer, but it just give you an idea of how to answer them in a way which provides structure. And we're trying to create that as well, and that's part of the resources we're going to create, inshallah. What would be useful is if you had examples of questions that you think would be relevant, that you'd like to include in that list. And maybe we'll create some sort of Google Doc sometime and just anybody to input into the questions so that we can almost just list those questions and then start answering them, inshallah.
Absolutely. And I think it's important we have that involvement from the parents that say, you know, this is the type of questions we're getting, this is what we would like, and to engage with us in this. So if you are watching this webinar and you do want to engage in this topic, then please do contact. I think we'd love to hear from parents and seeing where the challenges are, and you know how we can address that, inshallah. Is there before we end, Brother Yusuf, is there any closing message or anything you would like to say?
I think really what I just want to say to anybody who attends these things is, you know, see, it's really important that we try and communicate all these types of messages, simple messages, to other people who we meet, because really we should all take the responsibility to help other people in because we're part of a community. We got ultimate responsibility over our children, but we also care about other people's children as well. So please try and amplify the voice of these messages by communicating this to other people, having discussions with them, and just helping them to make small changes in their lives, even if it's just love your children, kiss your children, hug your children, especially fathers. This message is really important for fathers, and just explain to them the consequences of potentially not, if a child grows up not feeling loved by their father, what could potentially happen for them and in their lives, and so why it's important for us to show that. And if you've got any questions, I put my my email in the chat. Please feel free to contact me, and please support also this Ramadan Brother Ali's work as well, which is hugely important and vital for our community as well, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair.
So that's for those who can't see, that's Yusuf, YUSUF, at SREIslamic.org, and inshallah you can join there. I'd like to thank Brother Yusuf and reiterate that it's important that we continue to fund things like this, for what Brother Yusuf is doing in the community and for our own community. It's so vital that if we need these resources in the blessed month of Shahr Ramadan, that we make that commitment, make that pledge to support this, to learn ourselves, and also to help the community, because what you donate for now will be a sadaqah jariyah, inshallah, for you, for people who are then guided and get that guidance through this program, inshallah. For next webinar, inshallah, we talk about gender. We will talk with Dr. Miriam Grossman about the transgender craze, which is happening. So that, inshallah, will be in the start of May. We have a two-part webinar. Inshallah, you can join us for that. And please pray for us in this holy, blessed month of Ramadan, that we get guidance and we get the support, and inshallah the basira to do what is right for our communities, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.